we are on an arc.
Yeah.
Down here.
Oh, nice. I like that.
And if we don't all row in the same direction, if we're not working with Santa Clara City, which we work well with, and Ivan City and Washington City, I mean, if we're not all rowing in the same direction, we're just going to go in circles. Yeah. We need to work together down here. It's kind of forced us to work together. And so I enjoy it so much more than having to deal with the Wasatch Front issues.
From the Blue Form Media Studios, this is the 435 Podcast, the pulse of Southern Utah.
Hey, everybody, I'm Robert McFarland with the 435 Podcast. Today's guest is Shawn Guzman. He's the Director of Governmental Affairs for the city of St. George. He was the city attorney for St. George for 18 years. We talk about the dynamics of the complexity of what's going on in Southern Utah. As the Director of Governmental Affairs, he's talking to everybody, the federal delegation, the state delegation, the different cities within Southern Utah. So he comes at it from a unique perspective. We talk a lot about topics we've talked about a bunch on this show. So one of the things is we want to keep the conversation going about important topics such as Zone 6, housing, water, things like that. So we hope you enjoy this episode. It is election day, so we hope you better get out there and vote if you haven't already done it. Make sure you drop off your ballots before the end of the day to make sure that they're being counted. It's going to be a wild one. We hope the week ahead is calm and everybody keeps their head together. But enjoy this episode, guys. Get you away from the federal stuff, talk about local stuff, and make sure you jump in the comments. And also, last thing, November is Diabetes Awareness Month, and the Washington County Diabetic Youth Association is raising money this month for the youth of Southern Utah that have type 1 diabetes. As you might know, my son, Robert Jr., has type 1 diabetes. He was diagnosed when he was 4 years old, and the Washington County Diabetic Youth Association has been a great organization for him to be a part of. We're raising money to send kids to camp and to really help them understand and help the community understand diabetes and how it affects all of us. So this will be the last time you see me with my beard. I'm going to shave it off for November to raise awareness for diabetes. Make sure you jump in the link in the comments to check that out if you want to donate to the Diabetic Youth Association in Washington County. The link will be there. We hope you get out there and definitely be part of the community, guys. Thanks for listening to the episode. We'll see you out there. I wanted to have you on. I wanted to have somebody from the city as a day-to-day manager, kind of the ins and outs, and obviously John isn't as interested in doing interview type conversations. So having you on, not necessarily as a substitute for that, but I think you have kind of a interesting perspective as far as city politics goes and the management of the day to day. Because you were a city attorney for St. George for a little while, right?
I was for about 18 years.
Oh, way more than a little while. Yeah. 18 years.
I've been with the city for almost 21 years.
Oh, dang. Yeah. So you've seen St. George go through all kinds of different changes.
A huge change, yeah.
So how would you gauge what's happening today if we were to say, like, I hate this, but we did this for 9/11, where it was like the world changed after 9/11 and then the world changed again after COVID. When you look at those two windows of time, are they comparable as to like the shifts in government management? When cities go through, big shifts in whether it's the economy or cultural shifts within the neighborhood, would you say that today's more or less affected by world events than it has been in the past?
Oh, that's a good question. If you're talking about world events, I think it's just different. Yeah. When you're a small community, a community that doesn't have a lot of variety in employment, for example. Mm-hmm. When you're more dependent on tourism, then things are different. When you're a smaller city trying to handle all the complexities of a city like St. George, then it's different than when you're a larger city. But the challenges are different, but they're still challenges. Mm-hmm. Let me just give you an example. Most people don't know this. Most cities in Utah, if you go up north, let's take a Layton, for example. Mm-hmm. They used to compare us to Layton a lot, although Layton was always bigger than us. We far surpassed them now. But Layton is within UTA's district, right? So they don't provide any bus service.
Okay.
Layton doesn't have an electrical service. They have Rocky Mountain, whatever their current name is.
Rocky Mountain Power, but Pacific Core, I think.
Pacific Core, right? Yeah, they provide the power. They don't have an airport. And so those are just some of the things that are unique. They don't. They have a small dispatch center, but not a large one like ours, where we do the 911 dispatch for the entire county.
Yeah.
So they don't. Their city isn't as complex, right?
Yeah.
Here, even when we were a small city, when I got here 21 years ago, we still ran the dispatch for the entire county. We ran the bus service. We had an airport that has always been the second busiest airport. We have the largest regional airline in the world, not the country, but the world, headquartered here in St. George.
Yeah, SkyWest, yeah.
SkyWest, yeah. And we could talk about that later and some of the fun things we're doing at the airport. But we have our own power company. We're the largest municipal power company in the state of Utah.
Wow.
So when you
largest in terms of
customers.
Customer base. Okay. Yeah.
Customer base and our energy usage. So you look at what a city has to do that was our size 17 years ago, and now it's still far more complex than the average city in Utah.
Yeah.
And that's on top of all of the recreational events we do, all of the the marathons and the Ironmans and having 5 million visitors to Zion come through here. So it's not your typical city.
So thinking about the different phases over that last 20 years, is it, I guess it has to just get more complex. It has to get more difficult to be able to manage, that kind of even though the population, I think we're the fourth or fifth largest city in the state as far as population size,
fifth
right?
or sixth, depending on whose statistics you look at. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So,
and remember back then, when I got here, I think we were the 17th largest city.
Wow.
So yeah, big changes.
We've grown a lot over those last 2 decades, and so now as we've grown population size, but those services that you mentioned, I think that's an interesting point that people tend to forget is as much as we feel like a small town, we're on the governmental like management of it. We're not a small town. We're quite large.
We've been complex. And one thing people don't like to talk about, but we do, is we are the regional sewage treatment for Santa Clara, Ivins, and Washington City, and they've all grown. Most cities, like a Layton, belong to a district that handles that. So we handle all of these things that other cities in Utah don't do. So even as a small city, it was complex, and as a large city, it's complex. It's just the challenges are different. Keeping up with the growth, for example, is a big challenge.
And so when you think about the year to come, 2025, the legislative agenda, there's a lot of things that are kind of impacting Southern Utah specifically on that agenda. What do you think is the most impactful? What's like the biggest? It seems to me the biggest buzz topic of conversation has been housing. But what are some of the other legislative agenda items that are going to impact our complicated city dynamic?
Well, I think the biggest challenge we have every session is protecting cities' rights to make decisions at the local level. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because we have a Republican legislature, a supermajority, right? Mm-hmm. And you would think that they would be all about local control. And not lean towards maybe a system like Oregon's, where they do all the zoning at regional and state levels for cities, or California, where they're continually chipping away at the ability of locals to make decisions at the local level. But we find that the opposite is true in Utah. Every session, it feels like there's another bill that's going to take away cities' autonomy to make decisions. And do
you think that cities saying we don't want to manage it, like the Layton, where they don't have to manage all of these other regional things, and they're wanting to set aside some of those decisions to say, well, it's not up to us, let's have somebody else do it. Do you think it's them pushing off that responsibility?
No, cities want to retain the ability.
You think so?
Oh, absolutely. When you see a zoning decision in Santa Clara, little Santa Clara here, that people are concerned about, they turn out en masse to their city council meeting, which is the way it should be. Can you imagine if those decisions were made at a regional level or even at a state level? When people are concerned about traffic, it seems traffic and zoning are the big issues for people. They want to be able to talk to their local, they want to be able to call the mayor.
Yeah.
And in a community like Santa Clara, believe me, a lot of people have Mayor Rosenberg's number, right? Yeah. And they want to be able to call the mayor. They want to be able to call Council Member Hinton and say, I have a concern on the speed on my street. Canyon View, people are driving too fast. Or I have concern about this development that's going to go in next door. And they want to be heard. And the higher up you go in government, the less people feel like they're heard.
Yeah.
I think people are concerned about whether their voice is heard at the legislative level. Although I think we do a better job in Utah than in other states.
Yeah.
Most people in Utah at least have their local legislator's number and feel like they could call Representative Walter, for example, or Representative Brooks and say, hey, I've got a problem. Will you listen to me? And they're willing to listen. And we don't want to lose that, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's our biggest concern is just being able to retain the ability for cities to zone, for Santa Clara to feel like Santa Clara. Santa Clara doesn't want to be St. George. They don't want to be Ivans. They want to be this community that people move in and love, and they want to retain that look and feel. And
but do you think that sometimes they make decisions because they're trying to protect this specific way of life that they have, that keeps them from having the ability to forecast down just even one more generation? Because I was actually just having this conversation with my neighbor. I live in Ivans, and Santa Clara was like the place to go for Halloween. That was like the place to go trick-or-treating, right? And these days, a lot of the doors and a lot of the houses are dark, right? There's a lot of older people in the community. There's far less youth and young families moving into that community because the inability, housing costs have gotten out of control. The development hasn't necessarily kept up with allowing, first-time home buyers to move in and keep that community vibrant and turning over within itself. Do you think that that local individual city doesn't necessarily have the ability to kind of forecast out long-term growth and what's healthy for the city and what's not? Do you think that tends to, be to their detriment?
No, I don't know that it's a lack of forecasting. I mean, you talked a little bit about the differences between being a small St. George and a large St. George. Well, I think one of the challenges we're going to have and we're seeing in St. George is how do you keep your older areas vibrant? It's easy for a city that's growing fast to look good, to look dynamic, but it's those cities that are getting a little older and haven't started that gentrification process where the younger families are now moving in to replace those older people. And be careful who you call older people, because I think I'm starting to fit in that category. Yeah, I
get that. It's a touchy subject
because all my kids are out of the house now, so we might be dark on Halloween. But that's a challenge. And I think if you look at St. George, our downtown now, which used to be looking like it was headed in that direction, is now vibrant. We've got young people that are scouring our downtown neighborhood to find a lot to build on or find a house to renovate, to go back there again. And that was with foresight. We negotiated with the school district, sold our beloved Elks Field to them for a great price so that they would build a brand new school downtown that people would want to send their kids to. We've improved this things that aren't fun. It's like an old house. People want to do the paint and the exterior, but it's the foundation and the plumbing you got to work on. Well, we've been working on our foundation and plumbing in downtown for years now and redoing. We used to flood quite a bit. Homes would get flooded. We've worked on our drainage systems.
There's still wood pipes. Red Mesa Fellowship. It's a St. George Community Church. It's right across from Dixie Tech. And we had some issues with the plumbing, and they did a sewer scope, and we still have like wood pipes because like back in the 70s, I guess there was like an iron shortage or something like that, and so they were putting it's like wood with like a composite material around it, and that was like the piping, and it's starting to collapse. And you know, there's some old parts of town that
pipe, Orangeburg pipe, that's ceramic. That I think it's ceramic. That's also has some problems. But we've been our water department has been very aggressively going through and changing those out, rebuilding the systems so that we can have that the growth downtown, the infill of those large old lots that are, you know, very deep
and narrow, a little bit narrow and long.
And we've come up with some unique zoning to try to encourage that. So if you go downtown now, it's a vibrant area and stabilize the school. We had the principal come in years ago, and she pleaded with us to help because her turnover in her class was such that her kids that were full-time residents downtown were not keeping up. Because every time new students would come in, she would have to backtrack and educate them on how the subject matter was being taught, what was their expectation on homework, get them up to speed to where they were in math and science and history and all of that.
Is it because it was mainly like renters? Is that the main issue? Okay.
And a kind of a transient population.
Yeah.
And that's the way it was headed. And our former leaders decided that wasn't the way they wanted it to go.
Yeah.
And you see that we've had some apartments go up. They're very popular. Those new apartments that have been built downtown fill up right away, which has added to the vibrancy of the downtown community because you see more people on the sidewalks now and going to different places there, restaurants, et cetera. And so there is a challenge that I agree with you. You want to retain that Santa Clara feel. You don't want to have the Swiss days and all of that. And it's true, your community is getting older. But you will see what's happened in our downtown is that as the people die off, I don't know a better way to put that.
Or downsize, just downsize
and move
out.
And that younger families, those will be the homes they can afford, hopefully to move into and to regenerate the vibrancy of those neighborhoods. It's the cycle you see all around the country.
And that's one of the thoughts that I had. Are we being too reactive with this increased push on density? Is it this idea that supply is the main driver of trying to keep housing affordability, in a zone where, it doesn't, as long as supply stays at a higher level, demand is going to ebb and flow, but it's going to slow the pace of the appreciated value of the home. And part of me thinks that this is just a small window of time where we're going through this pressure of affordability, right? Because wages are on the rise, especially all over Washington County. We're getting higher wage jobs come in here, but we're getting a lot of people that are moving here that work remotely. And so their wages are significantly higher than what they could get if they just lived here locally. Do you think it's just, do we have to have a little bit more patience in letting these cycles kind of come through? Do you think that's maybe one of the, tales of maybe we're not too reactive? We could probably be a little bit more patient with letting the system kind of work through, the ups and downs of the economy and housing ultimately will settle in and not continue to appreciate at such a rapid rate. Do you think that's maybe something that, the state or the local representatives maybe not making a reactive move on pushing super high density? Do you think that's one of the perspectives that people are taking?
Well,
or is that not really considered?
It's a very complex question. I should have been taking notes because I've been thinking of several things as you're speaking. First of all, the last big push statewide where we've got to do something about housing statewide. This is a nationwide problem. Well, what happened? 2008, right? The crash came. And the correction. Then all of a sudden we had half-built subdivisions, even here in St. George area, that were there for years, right?
Hundreds and hundreds of homes that were just vacant and half-built, yeah?
Yes, absolutely. So if we look back over history, there's always a cycle. And I'm afraid we're in one of those cycles. Here's one thing when you talk about how national politics affects us locally, interest rates and the economy, inflation. I mean, there are people literally here that were ready to buy a home, and then the interest rates go up, and they are priced out of the home just instantly. Because of the interest rates.
Yeah, just instantly.
Yeah, and I know of people that were actually building their homes, but had their construction loan, but not their final financing, thinking things were fine, and then interest rates went up, and their monthly payment went up $1,000.
Yeah.
And that prices them out of the market.
And
So
a lot of times they had non-refundable, money down on this build, and now come to the end of the, the final construction's been completed, and they can't afford it.
They can't afford it anymore. Yeah, and that's a crisis.
Yeah.
So when you say is that the urgency is I would say if you're trying to buy a home and you're a young family, I think there's an urgency there, right?
Yeah, there is.
And they're saying, "Why? I'll take a smaller lot.
Yeah.
I don't need a 10,000 square foot lot."
Yeah.
I mean, when I moved here 21 years ago, I paid $46,000 for a lot in Springville, Utah. That was a third of an acre, big corner lot. And that's what I built on. I came here 6 years later and paid almost $80,000 for a lot that was less than quarter of an acre.
Yeah.
And I remember telling my wife, I'm not paying that much money for this postage stamp sized lot.
And now they're $200,000.
Right.
For that same thing.
And so for me moving down here, I thought the lots were smaller, and yet I adjusted and I'm actually totally fine with the lot that I live on now. And
I didn't want to mow all that grass anyway.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And now, especially at my age, I don't want to mow all that grass.
Yeah.
And so I'm okay with the smaller lots. What we're finding is that actually the younger generation, I would put you in this category.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in what you think. But we're finding that a lot of the younger generation are fine with a smaller lot. They like those communities where they have a smaller lot. They still have a house big enough for their families, maybe minimum 3 bedrooms, 2 baths or 2.5 baths. And having that community pool and park or whatever down the way where their kids can go play. Having a small backyard that their kids can play into where they could watch them.
But doesn't take too much maintenance, because I want to spend, I don't want to spend my weekends just maintaining the house and doing yard work and things like that. But I want to go get on the trails and go explore, go do things in our community because we have a ton of stuff to do.
And they want a house.
Yeah, exactly.
And this is the way they get a house.
Yeah.
So I think just as I adjusted to a smaller lot when I moved down here from what I was used to up in Utah County, I think that all over the country we're finding that the younger generation there have fewer kids than I had 5.
So do you think that there's some pushback from because right now you're the governmental affairs director for St. George City, right?
Yes.
So that's, you're trying to collaborate all these different governmental organizations, right? From the county to the other cities to the state. So you're kind of a liaison. Is that the best way to kind of describe?
And working with our federal delegation too.
The federal delegation as well. So thinking about that pressure from the state, from the federal government to say, hey, we need to solve this housing crisis, this housing issue. Do you think that there is, some, we're holding the line saying, hey, we don't want to see a whole lot of change. We don't want to be super reactive. What's the pulse from the local representation? Do they want, is this zoning piece generally accepted by those political entities making these decisions at the local level to allow for higher density, or do you think there's some pushback there of not wanting to do that?
I think that the local officials, by and large, are on board with this. If you go to Washington City, they have some unique projects going on with Ent's homes, I believe it is, with smaller lots, but they look unique. I think the homes look unique, and I think even in Santa Clara, you have elected officials that can see the vision of having those higher density. But what the local officials don't want is they don't want someone telling them what those have to look like. And increasingly at the legislative level, they've been chipping away at our ability for design standards. Now, I think there could be some unreasonable design standards that cities may do, but I think by and large throughout the state, the cities understand that they want something that looks unique, but they don't want to raise the cost of the home too much. So if a city says, we want to see, if you're going to build this kind of density, we want to see 6 or 7 different elevations so that people living there don't feel like they're just living in a box of cookie cutter homes or something of that nature. We want those communities to feel like they've got a unique community as well. I also think there's a push by cities to say, why can't we intersperse these smaller lots into what you would call, quote unquote, a normal subdivision? So if you have a subdivision that has 10,000 square foot lots, why can't you have also 5,000 square foot or 6,000 square foot lots intermingled. Why is it that
they have to all be, it's like all or nothing type
right?
thing.
It's the old Euclidean zoning where you have just this zone where there are 5,000 square foot lots. And so you kind of ghettoize those neighborhoods. You kind of make those children feel like they're living in
And then the developers
areas.
on the other side is they're incentivized to cookie cutter that because these are the size lots that we could put, then basically all the homes are just going to be identical.
But they don't have to be.
They don't have to be. But if you had some lots that were ranging in size, it would almost kind of force the developers to say, okay, well, this design would fit better on this lot, and this design would fit better on this lot.
Exactly.
So allowing that kind of mix in together.
And
even in Santa Clara over here off Pioneer, I think it's Pioneer Parkway, Patricia Drive.
Oh, yeah, sure.
That development, I went to the city council meetings, and it really boiled down to how many units per acre. And when you fleshed out the units per acre, it was like 6.4 units per acre or something like that, which when you expand out for the whole development, because it's like 19 acres, it sounded like a ton of lots. But they made the developers come back to the table because they said that the density per acre was too high, and they adjusted it by like 15 homes. Like the difference between, in that 19 acres from approval and not approval was like 15 houses. And I just couldn't help but think how ridiculous that we got down to where it was just this units per acre was so important to us that they even had some of the mix. They had some smaller lots in the one corner, and then, along the streets, they had larger lots to kind of feel like there's a transition into it, which I really think that the developer went above and beyond. But the city officials, denied it and made them come back to the drawing table. It's a month later, a couple $1,000s more of redesign work through the architect and all the engineering for only 15 different homes. And I just couldn't help but think how ridiculous that was, but that's part of this complexity. That's part of this dynamic, is allowing the cities to kind of make these decisions. But I really was impressed with what they're doing in that subdivision, because it is a whole range of housing types and styles. So I definitely think there's a lot of cities that are, getting more creative with how we develop, not just having, quarter acre lots. I mean, Washington City in the Fields, and even St. George on the Little Valley and Washington Fields area, we've kind of done that still. We just made these, cookie cutter type lot sizes, and then we have just a bunch of big massive homes.
Well, now, and when you say remember in Utah, we could, and I had this talk with Governor Cox. I said we could go through St. George and zone the entire city 6,000 square foot lots. Mm-hmm. We'll get developers out in Little Valley that'll come in with a plat with 12,000 square foot lots.
Sure.
And they have the ability to do that. Mm-hmm. And so, because we're setting the minimum.
The minimum, yeah.
Right? So we don't have control. It's still it's still up to the landowner. And yes, the landowner, the developer. Yeah. And that's why we've been working with Suba. And I don't want to, I don't know the particulars of the situation you explained here in Santa Clara. And I certainly, I know there's always two sides to every story. But sometimes when you hear a story like that, you're thinking there's 15 homes that families could have purchased right there.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah. Yeah. That's what I was thinking.
And I have 5 children. All of them are living here right now. 4 of them are married. Only one of them has been able to buy a house. And by the way, the house they bought is over in Long Valley in Washington.
Oh, yeah. D.R. Horton. Yeah.
Yeah. D.R. Horton, if you've been out there.
Yeah.
And they have all ranges. It's like our exactly. desert color.
Yep.
All ranges of homes, all sizes of homes, some multifamily units, condos and some freestanding units. And those are going to go to the same school. They all share the same parks. That's the kind of community that people, I think, can live in, where you can get that kind of density rather than the old traditional, let's stick all of the 5,000 square foot lots over here. Yeah. And let's have all the 12,000 square foot lots over here. We'll have this high school that people will think is the rich high school. And, let's get away from that.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you on that too, and I think we've done a really good job in the county to continue to press that direction. I guess I have these bipolar moments where I'm like, we need more housing, we need more density, and at the same time, I live out in Ivins, and I love that there's not a ton of housing and there's not a ton of traffic to go to the grocery store and all those things. And with more density comes traffic and all those other things. So it's a tough balance to kind of weigh between the two.
Well, and think of the cost.
Yeah, and the cost.
And a lot of people don't think about that, but think of the cost per mile of keeping up a roadway where you only have 5 homes on there versus a roadway that might have 30 homes on it.
Yeah.
You know, with the taxes that are generated in that, there's a higher cost of maintaining those systems to the community.
Yeah, I think a house, when it comes to the city budget, right? A house is actually a cost to the city government.
We do not
Every time
make money.
there's no money being generated. No, there's not enough property taxes. There's not enough income coming in from that single house that allows us to maintain roads and schools and fire and police and all those things. It's a cost. And so that's where the commercial side comes into play, which is another topic of conversation. So if we step away from housing, looking at the legislative session and what, negotiations and things are going to come up in the next coming year, what are some of the other big topics that I think you've seen that are definitely going to be on the top of mind of the decision makers in the county?
Well, water is always an issue for us, and we're hoping to continue to receive funding. The legislature is focused on the Great Salt Lake and saving the Great Salt Lake, which is a worthy cause. And we've made the commitment here in Southern Utah that we will not divert a single drop of water from the Great Salt Lake.
Good. So, I'm glad. I'm glad.
But obviously water is an issue for us, and we're trying to build a reuse system throughout the county, working with the Water Conservancy District. St. George City has had a reuse system in place for many years. In fact, those new soccer fields you see out on the Shivwitz Reservation.
Oh yeah,
those actually are using reuse water from our sewage treatment plant. We have
awesome.
a line that goes all the way up there. But in any case, we want to expand that system for outdoor watering use. About 60% of our water use is outdoors. Even though I will say this, even though you hear these numbers that are incorrect, bandied about us using more water than
per capita or something like that. Yeah.
Right. I say you take a drone and fly over the new parts of Santa Clara, fly over the Washington Fields and Little Valley, and then go up to Salt Lake and fly over Harriman and South Jordan and all of those areas, and then look at the acres of lawn they have compared to what we've done down here. And I think without doing any punitive measures, we've naturally have conserved water. So if you talk to our water services director, he'll show you the graphs, and I don't have the numbers here, but our growth is like this, but our culinary water usage is more like this.
Yeah.
Because we've been naturally saving water without having to put the punitive rates in or anything. But water is always a big issue. We need help building out that reuse system, and we have a couple of reservoirs we'd like to get going, one right here in Santa Clara.
Yeah, the Graveyard Wash.
The Graveyard Wash, which, by the way, there are some people that say we need to change that name, and I think it's a very
I said
cool
that
name.
The other day. That's so funny.
What, that you want to change the name?
That I was like, it just seems so morbid.
No,
it seems
listen.
interesting for a reuse system. I was like, it's going to
Can
potentially
you
smell
imagine
like a graveyard.
the fun we could have every Halloween out
That's
there?
pretty good.
Come
That's
on,
good.
we be creative.
That's
where it is. And
Why do they call it Graveyard Wash?
Because it's below the graveyard. If you look right up there, you'll see the Santa Clara cemeteries right above it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Okay,
So,
that makes sense.
No. We need to talk offline about this.
Okay.
You need to become an advocate. Let's
advocate for the Graveyard Wash.
Come on. We don't want something just ordinary.
Yeah.
I mean, that is
extraordinary.
Unique. That
extraordinary.
This will be a unique thing.
So I think there's some struggles too with the reservoir they're trying to put up in Kayenta. I know there's some pressure from the residents there of how full the water can be and how if the level drops too low, the wind can blow and make people sick. There's always like this running pressure, no matter how good, it seems to me like a reservoir conserving water, keeping every drop that we can get. Because when we get water, we get it in a big, massive dump, and our dirt doesn't soak it in. It just runs right off the top and goes down the river. And so, conserving every single drop that falls in the county is the most important thing for us. But we still get pressure from local residents on, trying to stop things like these types of reservoirs. Do you see outside of that Ivans Reservoir, do you see a lot of pressure from other communities, environmental groups, trying to keep us from building reservoirs? Is there some pressure there?
I really don't. I think our biggest hurdle sometimes is dealing with the federal government and trying to get the land that we need. Warner Valley is very close to being, from what I understand, for the Conservancy District, and working with the BLM, getting that all buttoned up so that we can start construction on that,
because that one's supposed to be like twice the size of Sand Hollow, right?
It'll be a huge reservoir. And remember the idea of these, the graveyard wash, is we're going to store reuse water. And I know that people kind of cringe when they hear that, but most people don't realize that when they're in Las Vegas and they're drinking the water there, that's reuse water.
Yeah,
they actually
just not treat.
They take their reuse water and pump it out to Lake Mead and then suck it back in and treat it, and that's what they're using. And so people don't realize they've been in Vegas, they were already drinking.
I don't know if I drink the tap water in Vegas. So but, from what I actually have a client right now. He's moving here from Fargo, North Dakota, and he's part of a water treatment, a big national water treatment government institution that he's actually working on the Deer Valley Reservoir, and they're I guess they're putting scuba divers. They're going to do the entire system underwater, but they were going to have to drain the reservoir, and they were afraid that the reservoir wouldn't get filled back up, or how long it would take to fill the reservoir back up. So they're literally doing all of the water treatment stuff via scuba divers, and they're doing all underwater, which is so fascinating to me. And he said there's some amazing things that we can do with water treatment that this isn't 20 years ago. The technology's come a long way with being able to treat water.
I mean, anyone who lives along the Mississippi, if they're not thinking, because they take their water out to drink it, but guess where they're dumping their water into too after they treat it?
Yeah, it's true.
And then people downstream. But that's not what we're talking about here. So I want to make this clear on this podcast. I don't want is that we're not saying that's what we're going to do here. We want to store that water so we can use it outdoors.
Yeah.
On outdoor watering.
And it's not necessarily potable water, but it's basically 99% of the way there. I think there's chlorine treatment. There's some specific chemical treatment that's really expensive to make it potable water. But they're going to be able to use it on grass and crops and things like that. Right?
And that's exactly what we want to do is right now we're sending it down the Virgin River. Virgin River used to run dry. Now it does not run dry, right? Because we're putting that reuse water back in the river. And what we're saying is we want to store it so that when we have the outdoor demand in the summertime, but we're not getting the water in, that we have that water already that we can use outdoors to water the plants and keep our trees alive.
So that is mainly, is there a funding issue with that on the agenda this year? Is there some funding issues there, or is it mainly just working through these different organizations to be able to get the approvals to have these reservoirs built out?
It's with the legislative session specifically, it's just making sure that we get the funding that we need, that they remember that we are the 5th largest city in the state. A lot of our legislators are surprised to hear that. They still think of St. George as being small. When I tell them we're bigger than Ogden, and we'll be bigger than Provo and Orem individually.
In a lot of ways, we kind of already are, because they have the benefit of being able to have other towns kind of support them, whether it's through commercial or all these other things. We're on an island out here. We have to manage everything ourselves.
That's right.
I don't get the support of a metro to bring in jobs or anything like that.
Which is kind of a good thing.
It is a good thing.
I like it that way. But
it makes it challenging. But
I tell them up there is we are on an arc.
Yeah.
Down here.
Oh, nice. I like that.
And if we don't all row in the same direction, if we're not working with Santa Clara City, which we work well with, and Ivan City and Washington City, if we're not all rowing in the same direction, we're just going to go in circles. Yeah. We need to work together down here. It's kind of forced us to work together. And so I enjoy it so much more than having to deal with the Wasatch Front issues. And
so I guess maybe from your perspective, as that you're kind of that liaison to all those different organizations, has it been more difficult to get everybody on the same page?
Down here?
Yeah, down here over the years, because that Dixie spirit, this idea that we have to collectively do everything together. I remember, I've said this a bunch of times, so I've heard this before. I apologize, but I think of the Santa Clara was dammed 10 times from 1890 to 1910. The dams just kept failing because we'd have these big monsoon rains come through and they'd just wash out the dam. And it would take legitimately every, capable adult to go out and fix those things, because without holding the water, without keeping that water, we weren't going to be able to survive through that next summer. And so that collective spirit of getting the entire county all on the same page, it kind of runs deep within the community as a culture. Do you feel like it's gotten a little bit more difficult as we've seen this population? I'm not from California, but I moved here from California. I lived there for 10 years. From an outsider coming in and looking at collective spirit, do you think that there's been some change and some difficulty in getting everybody rowing the same direction over the last 10 years?
I would say over the last 10 years, it's actually gotten better.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, I do. When I came down here, there were, there was the old timers, and they'd have the Dogtown versus St. George versus, it's interesting, and it's not something that's just unique from down here.
Yeah,
when I moved to Springville, I remember when I was on the planning commission there, and I mentioned doing something with Spanish Fork, and I heard a huge howl, like, we don't do that, and to me it was like,
they're on the other side of the tracks.
Yes. And I was like, they look just like us.
Yeah.
But, I didn't see that. I worked at a law firm in northern Utah County, represented 5 cities. And I'm telling you, I had to remember which city I was in that day, because it was like, no, we're not going to work with them. We can't work with, and to me, it was a unique thing. I came down here and I found that by and large, people, it was more like a family. So you might have the interfamily squabble, but if anybody from the outside tried to pick on any one of us, everybody had, they had their swords drawn and they were ready to do battle.
Yeah.
And so it was a unique and fun atmosphere.
Yeah.
If anything, I think as I've seen the turnover from the old guard to people that have moved in from other communities up north or from other states, I see more territorialism with those new hires that you kind of feel like you have to sit down with them and say, look, Robert, let me explain. I know you came from the Wasatch Front and that's how it was up there, but down here we work together because we're working for the same taxpayers.
Yeah.
So you know what? Leave your tracks open so that the people can use them, and we will do this for you. That's how it was when I got down here. School district would come to talk to the city manager, Gary Espelon at the time, and say, hey, we need help with lights. And he'd say, okay, city will help you with the lights if you will agree to keep the track open so that the neighbors can use that part. Yeah. Or we can use your ball fields for our little league or whatever it may be.
We're going to make a deal. Let's make a deal.
And let's all work together.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win, right? Because we're working for the same taxpayers.
Yeah.
And what I fear is that we will lose some of that, because I've noticed as new people move in, they kind of have that territorial, it's ours.
Yeah.
And we have to remind them, nope, it's all of ours, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we all live in the same community. We serve the same people.
Yeah.
Let's just make it easy.
Yeah. And I understand that. And I think that collective ultimately benefits everybody.
Yeah.
When we can.
And I'm
make
telling
those
you,
deals.
that's a unique situation. I've been involved in government for about 30 years in Utah, and compared to up north, what we have down here is very unique. Yeah. And that's what I worry about us losing as new people come in.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, I think one of the other topics of conversation I know is I'd like your perspective on what's going on with Zone 6 and the Northern Corridor, because it seems like there's this little trade-off that's happening that Sitla's basically said, if we don't get the Northern Corridor, we're going to develop Zone 6. And it seems like a heavy-handed kind of pressure for the environmental groups to say, make a decision. We're going to have one or the other. What's your perspective on how does that end up being a win-win? Is there a win-win in that category, or
I think there absolutely is. But let's go back to Sitla, because I think that's kind of an unfair analysis.
Okay.
You remember Sitla is just following the state mandate. When the state was organized, these institutional lands were set aside to be used for funding schools and also certain institutions that the state had for the blind and the deaf and some others, but mainly for the schools. Mm-hmm. And that was a unique thing, by the way. I think
very unique.
I think Utah was the first one to get those, and then Arizona and New Mexico.
It was very forward thinking from my perspective.
And it was out of necessity, just because so much of the state was in federal ownership, and the goal had always been to get it in private ownership. Mm-hmm. Right? That has always been the goal. Now that's changed over the years by Congress, but people forget that the whole goal was to get that land into private ownership so that it would generate taxes to help fund state government and everything that they need, right? So in any case, but Sitla's mandate clearly is to generate money. The courts, there's even a Utah Supreme Court case, and I can't remember the name of it, many years ago, that said when they talked about preserving, I think it involved preserving some inheld lands, some state land that was surrounded by federal lands. And the argument was, well, school children can go and enjoy that, right? And the court said, no, the whole point of Sitla is to generate money And that's what their fiduciary duty is. They need to do that. So they are just following their fiduciary duty. The fact that they were willing to put that property in Zone 6 in exchange for the Northern Corridor was actually an amazing feat that we were able to do. I'm very grateful for SITLA to do that. And their idea was, well, if we get at least the Northern Corridor done, then some of our property over by I-15 and where the Northern Corridor
exit 13
becomes more valuable, right?
Right.
And so getting them to do that was an amazing feat.
Well, I think, and I won't, I have very mixed feelings on it, and probably unpopular opinions, at least to the institutions on SITLA, because I think SITLA does have this mandate, but I think they've gone away from necessarily the mandate and more towards we need to make the most money possible.
But that is the mandate.
But the mandate is to take care of generating income for students.
But if you have a fiduciary duty, if your sister has 5 kids and she passes away and says you need to manage this trust for them, your fiduciary duty is to make as much money as you can for those children. And the court was very clear to SITLA that's their duty. Now, obviously SITLA can take some things into account, like this one where they're saying, okay, yeah, we could see where if we forego developing this property and we get the Northern Corridor, this could make this property more valuable. So we got a trade-off there. So we think we can do that.
But I think they're the idea of getting money for the students versus educating the students. Like, what's the best thing for the student? In my mind, the best thing for the student would be to have the best teachers, right? Or to have the best schools.
But that's not in SITLA's purview, right? Theirs is only to make the money and put it in the fund. And then that's up to the legislature, that's up to the state school board, that's up to the local school boards
fair enough.
To make those decisions on
how that money is distributed.
Dealing with teacher pay and all of that. That's a whole different realm.
Okay.
SITLA needs to stay in its lane. Its lane is to
even Zone 6, protecting Zone 6 actually has a valuable element to it as well, because the value of that protected property for tourism and things like that is that there's going to be some future value, because it's the appraised value of that land, in which they could then trade that land out for other land that they could turn into development, right? So like if they
except that they're not doing that, right? So they're actually, I think, that's a good observation. But what I think your argument right there is saying that what SITLA is doing is even better. Because they're not saying we need to trade this for like land somewhere else. Yeah. They're just saying we're willing to forego development of this to make
forego the development
current property more valuable.
Right, exactly. And so what I'm saying
they need to be applauded for this.
It's definitely a smart strategy for them to protect that. It gives them value for that land for future trade value somewhere else where they could then actually go build buildings. But then this property, Zone 6, would always be maintained as protected for Mose Valley and for the turtles and or tortoises. Sorry, people, tortoises, not turtles. And
better pristine property, by the way.
Much better property.
Agreed. And the studies that they've done, that the BLM has done, shown that there's more native grasses, et cetera, out there in Zone 6 than there is in the small acreage. And I can't remember how many acres would be, like 4 acres would be impacted by the Northern Corridor.
For the road.
But all that area, remember, has that cheatgrass that's not native, that's been burned several times. Mm-hmm. And so there's this area in Zone 6 is more pristine. That could be saved.
And I agree with this too.
6,000.
So why do you think it's not? Why is it a lose for the people that are trying to fight that road? Why do you think they're not seeing that as a win-win?
Well, and that's a good question. Did you go out to the congressional hearing they had at Sand Hollow?
I didn't. I had Holly Snow Canada. She's the executive director of Conserve Southwest Utah. I had her on here, and I couldn't really pin down and get a feeling for why that didn't feel like a win-win. And to them, it seemed like they were separate things. And in my mind, I'm like, well, it's kind of not, because the whole purpose of the Northern Corridor is SITLA's land on Exit 13 in Washington Parkway, and this is also SITLA land. To me, they're clearly connected, but I couldn't get a sense for why this didn't feel like a win-win. It was very strange to me. So I was wondering maybe you had a better
I don't either. And I know Holly, and I respect her. She's
very smart.
Oh,
she's very
brilliant
smart.
person, and oh my gosh, I forget his name. But the Conservative Southwest Utah, I think, are great people.
Yeah,
and
they do a lot of great stuff.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and we want to protect as much as we can. But you know what I found interesting about that hearing is that you saw the people with the big badges on, right? They were the Conservative Southwest Utah. When I went out to my car to go home, and for some reason, 3 cars caught my eye because I watched the people get in them. Only one of those 3 had 2 people in them. The other just had 1 person in. And I followed them. We were in the same track all the way from Sand Hollow off the St. George Boulevard exit. All 3 of us. I mean, there were 4 of us. I watched them. And there's the 3 and me. Only one had 2 people in their car. And I wanted to stop them and say, do you guys see? This is why we need the Northern Corridor. It's because you all drove out in 1 car, 1 person per car, and because you want that freedom to come and go when you want to.
Yeah.
And let's face it, we talked about density earlier. Well, if we're not going to have the density, we are never going to be a walkable community, right? I mean, our downtown is starting to become walkable, but most of the areas here are not. And our bus service, unfortunately, we don't have the money to run a bus every half hour and to expand it. So it's very limited for a lot of people to use. And so people drive their cars. So I thought, how ironic that here they go out there to protest the Northern Corridor, and each one of them's in a car.
Individually
they
driving
didn't
to the same
bike out
place.
there. They all didn't get in the same car.
They didn't carpool.
And that's why we need it. But here's what I don't understand. And you can look at Zone 6 and you can look at the Northern Corridor. I'm looking at downtown St. George that we've talked quite a bit about. One of the alternatives that they're saying is to do a one-way couplet, which would mean that they would blow out the medians in St. George Boulevard. It would be a one-way road. There would be a lot more traffic on St. George Boulevard. Right now, it's easier to cross the street. We try to make it easier to cross by Ancestor Square and Main Street and that area to increase walkability and to make the boulevard at least more inviting with the planters. All of that was millions of dollars that the city of St. George spent when UDOT redid that road. UDOT didn't pay for that to make it more walkable and inviting. And now they want to blow all that out and make it a one-way that way. And then 100 South, a very nice street that people still live on, make that a one-way corridor the other way. And in their environmental statement, they say in fact, this could make the property values go up. Well, I dare you to go down to 6th South or 5th South in Salt Lake City, where there used to be homes along there, and say, are those livable streets right now?
Yeah, definitely not.
And also it'll create an island with Tabernacle right in the middle.
Yep.
It will divide our parks from the kids that want to use it. It'll go right by our new school that we sold the Elks Field so that they could build that new school to make it a magnet school to bring kids into that area. And buy our new fire station that we built specifically so that we could go both ways with our fire trucks under the freeway to go east or go west on 100 South. I mean, all of these things, so I say
the alternatives don't make any sense.
They damage the human environment. And
even expanding Red Hills Parkway, like the idea of having the exit off St. George Boulevard connect up into Red Hills Parkway, and I can't help but think you're still cutting, adding traffic through that.
Through, by the way, the Point, which the city helped Switch Point to purchase to house previously unhoused people, and that they're expanding now to over 100 units.
I know, which is an amazing program.
But it'll wipe it
program.
all out there. And then our Dixie Rock, that I'm supposed to call it the Sugarloaf, the historic Sugarloaf.
Yeah, it's Dixie Rock, but it is the Sugarloaf too. It was Sugarloaf, I think, before it was Dixie Rock. Actually,
but they want to do an interchange up there. And that'll totally ruin that atmosphere. I love taking my grandkids over to the desert gardens, and they love going, especially at Christmas time and Halloween when they decorate it. Well, now you'll have a freeway going right past there. And they're saying that won't cause any damage to the human environment. I'm saying at this point, we've got a northern corridor we can build that's only 4 miles long that impacts a very small acreage.
That would pull a ton of traffic off of Green Springs, right? Because you'd add so much more development on exit 13, which really is the center. It's kind of the center of the county. You know, once things are finally fully developed, it's right there at the center of the county. That interchange going up into Zion, SR9 is just up the road a little ways. You know, I think that it's really important that we develop that side because it'll take the pressure off of Green Springs, which is
people won't be driving into
nightmare.
St. George or into Washington to shop and do those things that live out there.
So
also we're
speaking the same language. So I was hoping you could tell me what they saw, but I guess we're both at a loss. For
I'm at a loss because I think that as human beings, we need to protect our environment.
Does any of the local community members, like the city council, the mayor, you know, even the state legislators, do they even have a say on what happens with Zone 6? Like no. if writing our congressman, I've seen like these petitions and stuff going out, they don't really have a say in what happens with Zone 6, right?
Not really. We're asking our delegation, of course, to support us on this, and with the Northern Corridor, and I think that would help. I don't see it really helping with this administration, to be honest.
It really is up to the board at Sitla,
to BLM,
and for Zone 6.
Well, okay, for Zone 6.
Yeah, Zone 6.
You know, I think you could go to your legislators, but again,
it ultimately lands on Sitla and their board and their
right, because they have that mandate, they have that fiduciary duty.
So maybe the governor. I mean, the governor can influence that board to do something differently. But I mean, even like the city council members, you know, the mayors, they don't really have a say in being able to do anything about that, right?
No, not
I didn't
really.
think so.
Yeah.
Sorry, to clarify, did you say this road was only 4 miles?
Well, like the total, like if you look at the width of the road, because I think it's only a 4-lane road, right?
It's a 3-lane road initially.
Initially a 3-lane road. So it's just the distance between the end of Green Springs and then to the Red Hills Parkway.
It's like 4 point something miles.
Okay. I find that fascinating. Anyway, sorry, continue.
Yeah, it
I don't understand what
it's not like it's a freeway. They're not putting a big old freeway there.
Okay,
it's like there's going to be
it's
only a 3-lane road?
I think
it's one passing lane or something like that?
I think right now there's and so I am not sure.
Yeah, I think there's been a bunch of different like proposals, a couple of different.
So I don't want to go on the
routes.
record of saying how, but I know it's not going to be 4 lanes initially.
Okay,
I don't believe it's going to be 4 lanes.
So it's not.
But
not
the width of it will be wide enough the width of the right of way will be wide enough to expand it.
Okay, got it.
In fact, I think the plan at first is to do an at grade intersection at Red Hills Parkway, but they could also do a flyover from Red Hills Parkway over to it, but it's just, you know.
So I guess before we start to wrap up, I kind of want any other thoughts on, you know, the year ahead and projecting out, you know, what decisions the cities are going to be making and counties going to be making. Is there anything else that jumps out to you? So we have housing, water, you know, the Northern Corridor. Is there anything else that, you know, in the next year that looking down the road, there's some big decisions to make? I know there's the RAP tax that's on the ballot this year. You know, is there any big, you know, decisions the city's going to have to make in the next year or two that you're kind of forecasting out that we need to kind of think about?
I think the only thing that that's a good question, because those are all issues that are ongoing and need to be addressed, right? So growth is huge, and infrastructure, right? I mean, somebody's got to pay for the infrastructure. With the inflation that we have right now, we have what are called impact fees. That is the idea of impact fees, is that current residents should not have to pay for new growth, right? I mean, you living here in your house in Santa Clara that's been here for 20 plus years should not have to also pay in taxes and fees to help offset the cost of infrastructure for new houses coming in. They should pay for themselves, right? So that's what an impact fee is designed for. The problem is we do an impact fee study 5 years ago, and you can imagine what construction costs have done in those 5 years.
Right.
So when it comes time to build that new water tank or to put in that new sewer line, we're finding that the costs far exceed what we had planned for, which means now we have to pull out existing funds to help fund that growth, to help fund the
police
infrastructure
and stuff like that.
And so that's a challenge right now for our local governments. St. George City, I believe I know it's been over 30 years since they've raised property taxes.
Yeah.
And people
have they considered doing like a special district taxes? Because my client who's moving here from Fargo, he's like, we have our taxes, but then we have these special assessment taxes that are almost equal to what their regular taxes are, that they get paid based off new development. So it's like spread out over a long period of time. But is that something that they've considered, is doing, special assessment districts, special tax districts?
There are some new tools that can be used that were just been implemented by the state, passed in recent legislatures over the last 5 to 6 years. One's called a public infrastructure district, where the landowners can get together, and usually the developer owns the land. So there's one landowner, or maybe
I think they did this up on Tech Ridge, right? I think they just passed a PID on Tech Ridge for parks and things like that.
PID on Tech Ridge, and there's various forms of PIDs, but the traditional PID is similar to that, where they say, okay, we are going to fund the infrastructure from the property taxes that come out of this. There's going to be an assessment, and it's going to be for 20 years or whatever it may be, and it'll be in addition to the taxes you pay the city to help pay for the infrastructure in this district. And so there are some tools that can be used by developers. The political problem with that is after 10 years, you've got someone you're living in one of those homes, and you've got an extra $200 assessment on your tax bill, and you're looking at your in-laws that live just across the Southern Parkway in a different area, and they don't have it, and you're saying, well,
why am I paying that?
Why am I paying that? Yeah. And you go to your elected officials and say, well, this isn't fair.
Yeah.
They drive on my streets. I drive on their streets. Why do I pay this extra?
Yeah.
That's an interesting challenge.
Kicking the can down the road a little ways. Yeah.
But it can be used, and it can be used effectively, especially if it's used the right way. So if you're in an area that also will generate sales taxes. So let's say in that area they get a Costco or have an area set aside
shopping
where they're
mart. Yeah.
Yes, because you don't have the bricks and mortar that you used to, so you're not going to have a mall anymore. But you have some of those retail outlets, and you have some hotels and stuff that have value that will add to generate income and generate sales taxes. Then you could look at that and say, well, you know what, that can kind of help offset the fact that we're going to take some heat for this PID, because they also are going to be contributing to the overall community with those taxes, right?
So thinking about that infrastructure development, there's it's kind of an ongoing discussion on taxes and figuring out ways to generate revenue into the city that's ultimately going to benefit the entirety of the community, right?
Right.
So that one's kind of always.
Well, you've seen it here in Santa Clara, right?
Yeah.
I've watched as the neighbors were maybe not so happy about the development that's gone on around Harmon's, but I can tell you that has helped Santa Clara City tremendously.
Yeah, I think Harmon's brings in like $1 million in city tax revenue every single year. Just one grocery store, $1 million.
And then look at those others that are going around there that also help. But also, those residents, those people that are coming in to stay at those short-term rental communities right there, and the residents there now, where are they shopping?
Yeah.
They're going right there. They're not driving all the way down Sunset. They're not driving into St. George. They're staying closer to home, which means fewer miles driven for people. And really, in theory, some people could walk there if they wanted to.
Yeah.
So it also helps the locals right there not to have to travel so far when they need that gallon of milk or something.
So commercial development incentives, I think, is definitely an important one, at least on the west side over here, because that definitely is going to help us, especially police, fire, because both Santa Clara and Ivins, they share police and fire, and thinking of energy costs, all these things they're all interwoven together, which is pretty interesting. But your job seems very fascinating because you're getting a look at all of these different things and kind of blending all these things together, which seems like it's a difficult job to do.
Jack of all trades and master of none.
Master of none. Yeah,
that's we're working on our airport, some exciting projects out there.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And having to be up to speed on federal law governing airport funding, as well as going to the state legislature, who over the last 2 sessions, by the way, have given us $25 million $15 million to build our airport tower, which was very needed. Most people don't know that our air traffic in St. George is controlled out of LAX, not Salt Lake.
Yeah.
So when you're sitting on the tarmac in Salt Lake sometimes on that SkyWest jet, you're not waiting for Salt Lake to clear you. You're waiting for LA to clear them to take off. And we have so much GA going on, general aviation, especially coming in for, when the Formula One was in Las Vegas, if you'd driven out there, you'd see all
how many
of those
jets were here
and how big some of those private jets were. It's amazing. Well, with the PGA too, we're just finding that we need to have that control tower here. In fact,
and then expanding the runway and expanding some of the services and jetway.
The runway's good. We're expanding the terminal.
I'm sorry. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Our terminal is getting very crowded, and we apologize to people that are traveling. That
they're used to 15 minutes to just get through security.
But yes,
those days are
it's getting a little bit longer, so get there a little bit earlier. And we just opened up the lounge upstairs in the secure area so that people can walk the stairs, or there's an elevator to get up there and wait up there as well till their flight's ready to go. Yeah, and also get something to eat. Yep. And now they're getting the liquor license, should be here any day, and they'll have a place for someone to catch a drink if they would like to do that as well, and just kind of relax a little bit. But we need more gates. SkyWest Airline, again, like I said, is the number one airline in the country. And we brought Stuart Adams, President Adams from our state senate, and the governor down here at separate meetings. And one of the questions I asked them is, who's the number one airline out of Salt Lake City? And they all said Delta, right? Yeah. I said, who's number two? And they're like, American? I said, SkyWest.
That's crazy.
And there are days, Chip Childs tells me that where SkyWest is the number one airline out of Salt Lake International because of all the flights they take to Bozeman and those destinations.
Yeah, the Mountain West is, and there's a lot of people moving around.
And they're Alaskan, they're United, they're Delta, and they're American. So they fly for all of those. And they're headquartered in Little St. George. They could be anywhere else, but they stay here. And we want them to stay here. Yeah. And we're lucky they're here because no other city in this country of our size has connections to 5 major hubs with the different airlines that we have.
I know. I got tickets. I'm going to go to the inauguration, the presidential inauguration, and I got tickets right out of St. George.
Isn't that great?
To DC. With one stop in Denver. It was like $350. I was like, this is amazing.
And fingers crossed that the administration does approve the Alaskan merger with Hawaiian.
Oh wow! I didn't realize they were going through that.
Because then we could potentially get an Alaskan flight out of here.
Wow, that'd be awesome.
Go over to one of the Western hubs and then out to Hawaii, and
that would be great.
Yeah. So there are good things happening here. And one other plug I want to put, and I will say I'm on the hospital board. But do you know that St. George Regional was just named the number one hospital in the country?
Wow, I didn't know that.
It's amazing. And the previous hospital that held that title was NYU.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So
what is it based off of? Like, what's the
patient care? They have a bunch of different dynamics that they look
ratings
at and areas for criteria. It'd be interesting for you to have Euro Mitch Cloward that lived in Santa Clara for years and now is over the desert region. I don't know if you've had him on the podcast.
I haven't, not yet.
But just amazing. They just broke ground in Las Vegas for a children's hospital. First children's hospital in Nevada, Intermountain's doing.
Wow.
And it'll be Intermountain's first hospital, I believe, in Nevada as well. But if you look at the amazing things that we have here in Little St. George and Southwest Utah, it just shows that Dixie spirit of working together. And St. George Regional Hospital,
formerly known as Dixie.
Formerly known.
Dixie.
But that is not just a feather in St. George's cap, but in Santa Clara, Ivins, Hurricane, Washington, Leeds. All of our areas, all of our cities and towns here, because all of them participate in helping fundraise for that hospital and do great things. And this is just an example of us working together on that arc, rowing together the great things that we do down here.
Thanks for listening in. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. Make sure you're following us on all the social media websites. We love your support. We love the dialogue. We want to continue that going.
Find us at realestate435.com. We'd love to help you find a house here in town or help you get wherever you're going.